coming up to the second part of running the demo. Now you have to remember the demo is representation of our project, and everything that it is applicable to the demo would be applicable to our real project. So if you would be able to run and interact and understand the demo, you'd be able to understand the project that we are making. Okay. So let's open your VS Code. So here you can see me opening VS Code. You can see that I already have some extensions installed. I don't have all of them because I'm not going to use VS Code, but like for you, I would recommend you to use it. Now I'm assuming that you already have all of the languages installed as I specified in the project manager. You followed all of the tutorials, you did all of that. Okay. So now if we open our fork, close this page right here. If we open our fork real quick, you may see that in GitHub, if you would scroll a bit down, you can see that we are seeing the contents of the README file, readme.md file. MD stands for Markdown format. And here you can see that I formatted a description of the project and laid out some instructions of what you should do to be able to run the project. Now you see the differences here is that I'm explaining you to just CD into the database, but now we're going to do everything inside of the demo. So instead of CD and just CD database, we're just going to do CD demo/database. Okay. Now slashes are going to be different on Windows and Linux. On Windows they are going to be this kind of slashes. On Linux is going to be this kind of slashes. So if you see some of my commands having different kind of slashes, I may have forgot that I'm making a description for Windows, but it's not going to be that big of a problem. Okay. So now in your VS Code, the first thing you're going to see is this page. You're going to have an option to open a folder. Now if you don't see a welcome page, you can just go to Files and choose to open a folder. Now here you're going to need to navigate to where we stored our fork from the previous part 1. So we did it under the test, and this is our fork. We would click to open it, and here we would have to say that yes, we trust it. And here we would actually have our project. So let's open a demo folder. We can see the demo folder is identical to what our real project will look like, except for the project documentation part, but it is representing our real project, right? And I would want you to run it so that I would know that you actually know what is going on in the real project, right? If you would be able to run the demo, you would be able to run the real project. Okay, so let's start with the backend. So there are several ways you can do stuff. GitHub by default provides you some ways to run the project, but I would recommend you to use CLI instead, because for example for Python you would need to have some setup. You would need to do some setup, and for front end it is, as far as I know, it's impossible to run it using some VS Code tools. So all the commands I gave you, you just paste them in the terminal, or after you set it up, you're just going to need to paste one command to run it, and it's not that complicated. You don't even need to even remember them. Okay, so here we can see that under the demo, backend, and SRC, if you remember what I explained, all the code is inside of the SRC folder. So you can see that here we don't have any code here. Under the backend, under the front end, we don't have any code. But if we would open an SRC folder, we would actually see the code. Here we actually see the JavaScript files and CSS files and etc. It's not me making stuff up, it's what people do. So that's how people usually organize their projects. Okay, so here we have our code. I'm not really interested in it. So here on the top, you can see the terminal. You can you would want to run the new terminal. Now you can either do this or just open a separate terminal window. Depends on how you like it. You're probably going to like it in one place to make it less confusing for you to have like million windows with million things open. Okay, so you would want to, if you do ls, you would see that you are inside of the glabs fork, so your main repository folder. You would want to navigate where you need to be. So for this demonstration, we are going to the demo and the backend. Now, if we open our, or if we would go to our main README file right here, you can see that I'm explaining some steps. So I would recommend you to do the build database first. So I'm not going to demonstrate it right now because I already have a tables, but basically for the database, you're just going to need to navigate to the database. If during installation you haven't created a user, you would need to do these two steps. If you have created a user, you don't have to do it. Maybe you have to do these two steps if you created a user and you forgot the password from him. So then you would have to do these steps, okay? And then you will have to run two commands that are going to be identical, except for the username. Username is going to be the same username you specified for your user that you created. You're going to run this command and this command. If you want to understand what's up, is that here, instead of the Postgres table is basically a table where all the tables of Postgres are saved. All right, and we're going to need to run our schema. Schema is just going to create a new tables and create a new database that we are going to use and put our tables to. Now we have our database inside of the Postgres, quite literally. And then we would be able to choose our new database when we are seeding the tables. What does it mean to seed the tables? If you open a seed.sql file, you can see that we are just populating the tables. So seed is just populating the tables, okay? So choose the appropriate username, choose the glabs database, okay? And then specify the arrow and that you are doing this command. You'll be able to run these commands inside of the PowerShell or CMD if you installed it properly. Okay, you don't have a separate terminal like with Git. Now, after you created your database properly, you would have to do the backend. So we navigated to our backend like you wanted to, and for the backend you can see that I'm telling you to go to the backend, then I'm telling you to create an environment. So env stands for environment. Now, I see the problem is that on Linux, the environment I created is for Linux, but for you, you're just going to need to create a Windows environment. So you wouldn't be able to use this environment. So you would just run this command and it would create a folder called venv. Right? Then after you did it, you're going to need to use that environment. So for example, for me, I'm just going to need to write source venv bin activate, and then I would be inside of the venv environment for me, right? But for you, if you are on Windows, you're going to need to run this commands instead in your CMD, and this is for the PowerShell. After you did all of that, your environment is going to be empty, right? So a quick tangent about what this environment is all about. Now, what Python does and why we are using environments is that depending on the project, we're going to need to use different libraries, we're going to have different dependencies and all that jazz, right? And they may be of different versions. Let's say one project only works with a dependency of version 2.0 and another project works only with the version of 2.5, right? So here, if we would have just installed dependencies on our machine, we would have a problem. But what we are doing, we create an environment where we are installing our dependencies too, right? So what we are doing, we are sourcing that environment. Then we are going to run the pip install r requirements command, where we are going through the requirements.txt. So for this requirements, and we're going to install these libraries into the environments folder, so that every time when we would run our project, we would be able to use the appropriate and the necessary libraries, right? And we wouldn't have any version conflicts with another projects that use Python and use the same library but of a different version. Okay, so you see that I sourced my environment, then I would run the pip. Now you would have pip installed by default on Windows, I think. If you don't, you can always find a tutorial on how to install pip on Windows. Pip are requirements. It's important to think that we are inside of the environment, so you shouldn't run this command before you did this. Okay. Now you can see that everything is already installed. So it's not going to make a difference, but for you it will make a difference. After that, everything you would have to do is to use Python. Everything you would have to do is to navigate to src and to write the Python app. Now, what it will happen is that it is going to use the Python from your environment. So Python with all of the appropriate libraries, right? If you do it without this stuff and without sourcing the environment before, then your Python, the Python that is going to be used default Python, and you wouldn't be able to run your application. Now, the installation part is going to be done only once, right? So every next time you would just need to run one of these two commands and then run the Python. Now, in case somehow you have any problems with the environments, but you manage to install everything correctly, you can just do this. Let's try to do it. So we would go to our environment. You would have to specify scripts on Windows, but I would specify the bin for the binary, then specify the Python to use the appropriate Python, and run the application. Now you see that I would have an error here that tells me that it cannot read the .credentials file. So if we use our GitHub to navigate to the demo and to navigate to the backend real quick, we can see that here I'm telling you inside of the src, right, that I left you README file that tells you that if you have an error about app.py not seeing credentials, so app.py doesn't see credentials, you have to navigate to .src folder and run commands like this. And also the thing I didn't mention is that you're going to need to have credentials in the first place, right? So what is credentials? So let me real quick open the original that I have on my machine. Demo, backend, src. Now I have credentials file. What is credentials file? Credentials file is user and the password for the database. Okay, so in our application, Python application, you can see that when we are connecting to the database, we're going to need to specify the IP of the database, the user, password, and the database name that we are connecting to. Now, problem is if we don't use a folder like credentials.txt, we're just going to upload it to the GitHub for everybody to see, right? And you wouldn't want to upload your password and username to the open web, right? It is a bad idea, right? So what you would do, you would create a credentials folder where you would store all of the appropriate information that you're going to use, right? And then create something called git ignore, so basically it's a command that is, it is a folder where you would specify all of the other folders that are going to be ignored whenever you upload them to the GitHub. And you can see that inside of this git ignore, we have our credentials ignored. So now, you would need to go to your app, would need to create a new file. So you can press right click, new file, say that you want to create credentials.txt. New file, credentials.txt. Here you would specify your username and a password. So what I would do instead, can I do this? No, okay. What I would do instead, I would just copy what I had there originally. For you, you're just going to need to do it from scratch. So I will just copy it and paste it into my fork and save it, which is important. Okay. So now I have my appropriate credentials, so that if I would run an application, you can see that it runs perfectly. It doesn't have any problems except for this warning. That's it. That was the backend. No. The thing is that I want to check if it is saving the credentials there. 1 second. Yeah. 1 second. If I would have edited it out, but test G4 backend. You don't have to do it. I'm just checking something out. Status. Modified. Yeah, it doesn't seem to remember the credentials.txt, which is good. Okay. I just wanted to check it real quick. So this was your backend. Now the next thing you're going to need to run is your frontend. Now backend is already working, so you can see that it gives you an IP, so it's running on HTTP, your local loopback IP and port. If you put it in your browser, you will see that just getting into this page already creates a get HTTP request. So you can see that we see from what IP it was done. So it was done from the loopback IP. So we can tell that our server is properly working. Okay. So our database backend is done. So then we would have to go to the front end. So let me open the main tutorial. So for the front end, you're just going to need to do cd frontend, or just navigate to the frontend folder. Here you would see all of your files for the frontend. Now, what you would want to do when your backend is running is to open a new terminal. Here you would see a new terminal pop out, and here you would see option to go between different terminals that you have running. Okay, so here you will go into the demo and the frontend. You will do the same. Then we are going to need to do two things. So just like with Python, React, or Node.js more appropriately, is having some dependencies specified in the package.json and package.log.json. And all we have to do is do npm install to install these dependencies and be able to learn them properly, right? So npm install. Oh, I misspelled it. There is install with now. Okay. npm install. You see this small little thing here where it's animating the loading process. Here you will see a bunch of logs about stuff installing and having something being needing a dependency. Now it tells you that we have a bunch of vulnerabilities, but it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. So the next thing you're just going to need to do is npm run. Oh, sorry, npm start. Starting our server. So it will automatically choose the browser that is selected as your main browser and open a window in your browser. Now we have our application. Now I demonstrated to you during the meeting how it works. If you want to test it, you can go to your database seed and see, for example, the username and the password that we are storing in the database. And what it does, it just checks for the password and the username in our database, and if it exists, it sends you to this page where it says welcome and the name of the user. Okay. Now, if you're a bit confused about what is going on, instead of, if you open it in the GitHub, go to your demo. Inside of your demo, I left your README file, and you can see that on GitHub it is formatted nicely, where I basically give you a simple overview of what is going on, what it creates, and etc, etc, etc. Okay, so maybe you would need to read this to understand, or I would recommend you to just go through line and try to understand everything. And once you did it once, you will be able to understand it for everything else. Yeah. So if it didn't open in your browser, you would just go to HTTP localhost right here. So yeah, that's it. You just run the demo. Now the only thing that is left is to acknowledge that after you did it once and after you installed all the appropriate stuff, you don't have to do npm install all the time. You just need to do npm start. If you already have an environment with everything installed, you just need to run one command, right? So after the initial installation, you're just going to need to run one command. That's it. So we run the demo. End of the video.